Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Carrie Starr, Executive Director of the Community Institutes here at Roberts Wesleyan College. We are so glad to have you with us this morning. Now, as leaders of organizations, we've experienced many challenges and pressures brought on by the pandemic. Employees are leaving their jobs, at least in part due to mental health reasons, including anxiety, depression, and burnout. Retaining team members has become critically important, but it can be difficult to ensure our employees' mental health needs are being cared for. That is our topic of discussion today. Before we proceed with our program, I just want to begin with a brief word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we're thankful to live in a land of opportunity and freedom where we can come together as a community to learn from each other and inspire each other to continue to serve in ways that benefit others, especially those who are suffering. We pray for your wisdom today that we'll be equipped to empower the coworkers in our care. We pray your will and purposes be accomplished. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we're so grateful to have you join us this morning to discuss mental health in the workplace and what that means for each of us in our unique setting. Today's Leadership Breakfast is just one of several key initiatives the Business Solutions Institute is hosting to meet the needs of organizational leaders across Rochester and beyond. Now, if you'd like your learning to continue beyond this morning's event, you can join us on at one of our many online mini courses designed to equip and inspire you and your whole team. So in May, we're launching a 3-week online course on how to lead a short-staffed team, which many of us can relate to right now. And then in June, we're launching a 3-week course on maximizing your money from debt to investing. Those are just 2 of the many offerings that are available. There's a link in the chat if you want to explore those more. We're actually offering a special discount code today. If you use Leadership Breakfast, that coupon code is good through the end of April, and that will get 25% off any of our courses. So if you register you and or your team by the end of April using the code Leadership Breakfast, 25% off any of those 2 courses I mentioned or any of the courses listed there. So we'd love to have you join us and continue the learning that we can experience together. So go ahead and open that link in a tab that you can explore later, because right now it's time to meet our special guests. And this is the part I'm so excited about. I would like to give a warm Roberts Wesleyan welcome first to Dr. Lesli Myers-Small, Superintendent of the Rochester City School District and a 2021 Rochester Business Journal Women of Excellence Circle of Excellence honoree. Welcome, Dr. Lesli Myers-Small. So thrilled to have you today.
Thank you and blessings.
Also so happy to welcome Kim Allen, CEO of Dixon and Schwabel and a 2022 Rochester Business Journal Power 100 honoree. Kim, so glad to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Also, please welcome Dr. Destiney Fraguada, administrator at the University of Rochester and adjunct professor right here at Roberts Wesleyan College.
Thank you for having me. And
finally, last but definitely not least, Jean Pargas, Executive Director with Marketplace Chaplains, a national network of serving over 2,000 professionals serving businesses. Oh, I think you're on mute there for me, Jean.
I am still muted. How about that? Which is unusual for me. I try to avoid muting myself as much as I can. As anyone who knows me knows that. Now, good morning, everyone. So happy to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you, Jean. Well, what an honor to have these distinguished leaders with us this morning. For all of our attendees, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of your panelists. I have a few questions of my own to get us started. And then my colleague Michelle is going to be monitoring that Q&A, and she will make sure to bring those questions to our attention. So Destiney, we're going to start with you. As a healthcare professional, why is it so important for us to be discussing mental health in the workplace today?
Well, I think given the current climate of what we're living through and what we've been living through for, we're going on 2.5 years now, it is very important to keep mental health at the focal point for a lot of employees as an employer. Understanding that, having that balance between home and work is so important, but also being very sensitive to what a lot of families have experienced within the last 2.5 years has been quite monumental if we really think about it. A lot of us sitting here as panelists, as well as attendees, would never have thought in our lifetime that we would have experienced a pandemic such as this. So it's very important for us to have touch points with our staff on an occasion, just beyond the scope of performance. How are you doing? How's your home doing? How, are you taking some time out? Are you taking that time out for self-care? Because self-care is very important. That comes back to mental health and
Mm.
grounding. If you're not okay mentally, meaning that you come into work focused, prepared, you're not overwhelmed with all of the additionals. Sometimes some of the family members have gone from dual incomes to one single income household. So now that they're facing that, you want to be able to support it and go beyond the scope of just being an employer, but providing those resources that are available in the community and opening that ground and that space for open dialogue. And I
Mm.
think a lot of employers do not allow that open dialogue as we exist right now in the pandemic, where it's okay to, be a little emotional at work. It's
Mhm.
okay to have those conversations because guess what? Your employer is going through it too. It just looks a little bit different and then has a 10-foot, view, 10,000-foot view actually, based, a little bit different based on what they're going through in the weeds. So myself as an employer, I really pride myself on taking the first 10 minutes of every meeting that I have with my staff member to just, check in. How are
Yeah.
you doing? And allowing them to kind of have that conversation because you don't know if they are having that conversation outside of home.
Right.
So
Yeah, we just
it
can't.
lets them know. Yep, it lets them know you're human.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, thank you, thank you. Kim, I'm wondering for you, how have you seen your employees' mental health impacted by the pandemic? And when I think of Dixon and Schwabel, I really think of, I feel like this is something that you've always done well to really consider the well-being of your employees. So how have you seen that change in the last couple of years and what changes have you had to make?
Yeah, I think we had to step our game up a little bit, if that makes any sense. Yes, we have
Mhm.
always been a very culture forward organization, but I find that this pandemic has revealed itself in phases. So we had the early on portion of this where nobody knew what was going on, not a
Right.
single human being on this planet. And think about the magnitude of that, the confusion, the fear, the lack of control, all of the
Mhm.
things that build anxiety in a human being. And
Yeah.
so, yes, we may be really good at culture, but we had no idea what we were doing in this environment, just like nobody else did. And I think owning that very early on, and being really human about it and connecting with folks and meeting them right where they were was really important. And
Yeah.
safety and security were kind of the name of the game in that first
Mhm.
phase, caring for folks to make sure that they felt as though they had what they needed to protect their families and themselves and then show up at work. So it's a prioritization of need at that point.
Right.
So we really worked hard. We did one-on-one phone calls to every single one of our 110 person staff as a leadership team. We split the roster and just placed phone calls weekly to our
Wow,
team
that's
members
impressive.
just to check in. Yeah, and then they got a little sick of that. We started to get put right to voicemail, so we thought, okay, maybe they're done talking to us weekly. That was probably, a couple months in. So we had to find new and interesting ways to engage and check in, and we brought that down then just to the supervisor to
Mm.
employee level to make sure that the supervisors were reporting back to leadership the themes and the things that they were hearing.
Mm.
And once we moved past, I think, the fear and insecurity, we moved into I think the space of uh, paying attention to our team members, many of whom had very young families,
Yeah.
and their children were in the household and getting ready to head back to school. And what was school going to look like? You know, there was the time when they were caring for them in the early part of the pandemic while they were trying to homeschool. So there's just all this additional need. And at the
Mhm.
same time, we're running a business.
Right.
So I think for us, the important thing early on was to stay very connected. And then as we've moved through it, to pay attention to the evolution
Yes.
of our employee needs and stay very, very connected. And we talked a lot about our culture and how it was going to change, because it was scary for us to think about having a work environment that wasn't in person. And we are an
Right.
organization now that is work from anywhere, and we will be that for the foreseeable future. So we are welcoming people from all over this country to work for Dixon Schwabel, which is something I never thought that we'd be doing.
Yeah.
And our team members can choose to come into work or not come into work. And so when you
Wow.
think about rebuilding a culture that was once something for Dixon Schwabel and Company that now has to be something else, we're still working on it. We haven't perfected it, but we're focused on connection and community as
Mm,
opposed to culture. So what
mm,
are the ways that we can find pathways to bringing people together in new and different ways? And they're asking for it. Our most recent employee pulse survey, our team members said, I love the flexibility. It provides such peace of mind to know that I can balance my home life and my work life. And I love that the company trusts that I'm going to get my work done by providing that flexibility, but I also miss my people. And I want
right.
leadership to find ways to bring us together creatively so that
Yeah.
we can still have that special sauce that was the Dixon Schwabel thing. So we're
Yes.
still working at it. It's a work in progress.
I think that's such a great observation, that idea of the evolution of this and the different needs, and then it continues, right? I think we are all still figuring it out, which is why we're here today, because we all want to get ideas from one another. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
sure.
Superintendent Myers-Smalls, our schools have been so profoundly impacted by the pandemic. How have you responded to the increased levels of anxiety, stress, and burnout? Gosh, our teachers, and particularly teachers in the city, you all have been through so much.
Mhm. Thank you and good morning again. So just for context, on Friday, March 13th, 2020, Rochester City School District with the other 21 school districts shifted from providing education in a brick and mortar format to going remote. And so over that weekend, the district needed to figure out how to deliver educational services, how to feed scholars, right? And also how to provide social emotional services. And I just want you to imagine how challenging it was for some of our scholars who, in some instances, coming to school is their sanctuary, right? Is their safe space. And now they're sequestered away and can't come to school. And so that was certainly very challenging. I think
Mm,
the other context that it's important for me to set is that certainly there's the trauma. We dealt with the trauma of the pandemic. So being isolated, not being able to socialize with friends, with teachers, with adults in their lives. But there were two other traumas that Rochester City School District students faced. Certainly ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And we know the more ACEs you have, the more challenging it is. And so
mm,
we, certainly worked through that. But the third leg of trauma was certainly the trauma of racism and violence. And when I took the helm in Rochester 2 months after the shift to remote happened, that weekend we were dealing with learning about the fact that the Daniel Prude situation had occurred. And
right.
so I just need individuals to understand that that protesting and that outcry went past neighborhoods and schools in the Rochester City School District. So my scholars were directly impacted and saw that unfold in front of them. So when you talk about that, so now we have to provide support to our scholars on screen, right? So how do you provide social emotional support, which is so needed and so important? And so then that gets translated to the teachers, to our administrators, to our custodial staff, et cetera.
Yes.
So we were really working to make sure that we kept not only our scholars' social emotional well-being, but the adults who are responsible for serving them.
We're
So
bearing that weight for them, right?
yes, absolutely. It's very difficult. So we provided significant resources on our website, social emotional toolkits, how to interact with students. We also developed and became a partner with the Trauma, Illness, and Grief Network, which provides similar and like services to school districts across the county when they're responding to crisis. Further, we developed virtual staff support circles. And I have to tell you that I participated in some. Now, when the superintendent comes into those, sometimes that can create a little bit of a stir, but I'm telling you, the safe environment that our social workers and our counselors created was so important. And people really talked about heart things, right? Things that were, that they were struggling through. And then finally, really our principals who lead our schools, and then our department leaders who lead divisions or departments, they were very intentional about having conversations. And, similar to what my colleagues have talked about, really making sure that we're making those connections and we're building those relationships and just checking in with individuals to make sure that they were okay. And if they weren't okay, we had to be prepared for that response, and what type of supports or resources could we provide to help make them okay again.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. And thank you for putting us in that place, taking us there, and reminding us of all that we've been through. Incredible. Now, Jean, you bring a really unique perspective. Our first three guests have talked about what they have done for their leaders directly. I'm so impressed to hear how each of them have personally been involved. What you really do is you provide a unique resource for leaders. So we're familiar with chaplains in hospitals or the military, but how does a chaplain from your team care for people? Well, actually, I'm skipping ahead my question. So you recently, Marketplace Chaplains recently released a white paper highlighting the increased stress, burnout, and loneliness of people that are experiencing that as a result of the pandemic. So how does having someone like a chaplain from your organization on staff impact employees' mental health?
Yeah, that's a wonderful.
To us.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you so much. And it ties in so well to what the previous panelists were speaking about in terms of recognizing that individuals, right, the people that work in their organizations or even their family members are struggling with so many different facets and so many different challenges of today's society and the results of the pandemic. And now as we find ourselves sort of in a post-pandemic, but now a great resignation period and so many other things that are going on, that it's once again been highlighted how often people really don't have a lot of other people in their lives that they can turn to in regard to these issues and how they're facing them. And everyone is different. Everyone has these unique experiences and their unique perspectives. And so what we try to do is to create a relationship with employees. Right now we literally visit over 5,000 different business locations every week. And wow. We do have, yes, we have approximately 2,000 chaplains across the United States. And what happens is a lot of times, so many organizations, like what Kim was talking about, so many organizations deploy wonderful techniques, tools, support mechanisms, and they do a great job. And in some cases, people utilize those for periods of time, and then sometimes they kind of need to evolve to other things. And so what we try to do is we make visits to the workplace. So it's something that's a little bit more personal and proactive. And what we're really trying to do, I'll try to bring my hands up to the screen, is we're really trying to create a relationship with employees. Because what happens there, once we begin to develop the relationship, people are very, very likely to utilize the chaplain. So some different tools may have, like employee assistance programs are wonderful. They have amazing tools at the disposal of the employee, but sometimes the challenge might be without a relationship, some employees find it difficult to reach out to someone they don't know. And the advantage that working with a chaplain is that the chaplain has established some form of relationship with them. And then as a result, you'll see, and not just from us, but from chaplain organizations across the country, you'll probably see a little bit more of a, instead of a 3 to 5% usage rate, you'll see something more in line with a 50 to 65% usage rate. So
Wow,
the
that's a
usage rate
big
is,
jump.
yeah, it's incredibly high. There's no doubt about it. And I think what it answers is for leaders. And I've owned a few businesses myself in the past, and one was pretty large. We had about 150 offices around the world. And I think what this helps us to accomplish, though, is sometimes as leaders, we want to help and we love our people, but we don't always have the time to do it ourselves, right? Or our organization is just too large for us to do it. And sometimes we have team members, and even for them,
Mm,
it's a little big. And then sometimes we don't have the exact resources or the relationships with our employees in that manner. Like Dr. Myers-Small has a great environment that she was able to jump in with the staff and they were still open. A lot of times that obviously speaks well of her, because most
sure
of the time
does.
when a leader jumps in, you're right, it can create some concerns for the employees. So I think that's really where it all stems from. It's about relationships which make people comfortable to speak. And as a result, they get that message that we are there to love them, care for them, support them, and shoulder their burdens. And to do that in a way, and our mission for us, and I think it's similar to many chaplain organizations, is to share God's love in the workplace through chaplain care teams.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jean. And for those of you who may not have seen the link, if you would like to see the white paper that Jean and I are referencing, is the link is in the chat. If you want to click on that and open that in another tab to read later. Really fabulous, some wonderful data about the state of mental health in the workplace in general, and then kind of some statistics, and Jean shared some of those, but the difference a chaplain can make. And I love that Destiney and Lesli and Kim all shared with us ways that they personally have gotten involved. And for some of our organizations that have that kind of culture, that's really effective and wonderful. And I would agree, Jean, in some companies, there's not that kind of connection. And if someone were to come in, they might not feel as comfortable, right? Destiney, you start every meeting by asking how they are. Or I think of, Destiney Fraguada calling all their people those early weeks. I mean, getting a phone call from the boss, can you imagine? Like for some of us, that would be a strange experience, but because of the unique culture, you could step into that and do that, right, Kim? Because you used to have a 100% in person, like that was a really big deal at Destiney Fraguada, right?
It's a huge deal. I mean, our founders built this building as a place that people wanted to come to work for. It's a tenet of why the company was started, to make an insatiable place to work so that employees enjoyed being here and working with one another, and then therefore provided supreme service to their clients. So it's everything we were built upon. So it's very scary to think about not being here.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But I love that you talked about moving from connection and community. It used to be about culture, and now it's connection and community, which is what culture provided, but you have to find it a different way. I love that. Destiney, I'd love to come back to you. As you're hearing different strategies that our different guests have shared, are there others that you can think of specifically to reduce the stigma around mental health in the workplace? You were talking about asking people how they're doing personally, or like the idea of coming to work looking sad or emotional. In the past, we would have called that unprofessional, right? And we might have even said it's unprofessional to ask about someone's personal life or their family or their mental health. So do you have any suggestions for how we can kind of break that stigma about talking about mental health in the workplace? Because it's still present many places, even though the needs are also present many places.
I will say thank you, COVID, for ushering the breakthrough of being able to have that uncomfortable conversation, or as we many know in the business, HR no, that we don't have that conversation. I think the stigma is very much so alive. And as our population ages, our workforce ages and we start ushering in a lot of, more of an environment of a younger population, that a younger workforce that starts working, that are a lot more comfortable with, expressing themselves, their needs, their wants, what they're looking for from their employer, how their employer is not meeting their needs. We need to be a little bit more open and receptive. I think historically we've done a lot of surveys, we've, done a lot of strategic planning, and want to kind of, let's look at that 6 months into the year, let's look at that where we landed 12 months to the year, and kind of missing the boat on addressing some of the issues. So I think, really opening up the conversation in a forum format, having EAP, having availabilities to, having on-site counselors available for employees to have. There are a lot of employers that are having a lot of diversity and inclusive environments and departments that are necessary for
Yes.
us to be able to have these open conversations, because culturally, mental health looks really different for someone that is Hispanic versus someone that is African American versus someone that's Asian American. So that looks really different across the spectrum. And it's very important to be able to have, again, comfortable, open conversations, but the platform to have that conversations in, and know that, guess what, you express it, we're not going to use it to kind of come after you for it. Because that's the number one contending issue with a lot of employees, that if I express how I feel, if I express that I'm having this difficulty, if I'm expressing that I'm having a hard time at home and it's spilling into work, it's affecting my performance, it's affecting how I'm interacting with staff or even customers, I'm going to get fired. And ultimately, I can't have that conversation with my employer. But it's, letting them know that, thanks to COVID, we've had a huge culture shift.
Right.
Our environment overall has shifted to be very open, open across all spectrums, from, diversity, mental health, down to LGBTQ plus, even talking about racism, which we barely ever did. So I think to understand that mental health is impactful, and we are impacted by just watching the news, and that hurts. We come in with that, heavy weight on our shoulders, and sometimes we just want to talk about it. And, I can't stress that enough, working in mental health and also seeing how that impacts. And, when you don't speak about it, it lives in you and it comes out in different ways.
That's right.
So, it affects your health, it affects, your home, your work, it affects everything. So I think as an employer, you have to have departments open to have that conversation, policies in place to support that conversation, and also have it integrated in your culture that it's open. We support mental health, and we support taking, a self-care day or a mental health day. Before you say, people would say, I'm going to take a mental health day. They look at people like they were crazy. If we look
Right.
at 4 years ago, what do you mean you need mental health? What is wrong with you? Now you
Right.
say I need a mental health day, and that's like, geez, is everything okay? Now
Right.
we
It
come
used to be a
from,
joke. Now we take it
yep,
seriously.
yep. Now we come from a realm of understanding. And I think that's where we need to start doing a little bit more as employers, is understanding what our employees are dealing with day in, day out.
And recognizing if we don't address their mental health needs, it will impact their performance, right? Because
Yep.
it's not going to go away just because we are uncomfortable and we ignore it.
Well, I mean, look at our job market. We've had a huge shift. A lot more people are traveling. Traveling is, yeah, gas prices are high, but people are traveling for work. No one's really staying stagnant. As Kim said, we've moved to an environment of being remote. People are working from home, but is working from home healthy? You're isolated, you're home, you're not really interacting with those that you would interact at work. So what are we doing to support that as, you know, employers? Are we having that, hey, come and have a mixer with us, or come and meet us out. Let's have it a, social distancing safe place where we can go and interact. Because, again, we're human and we like human interaction. And sometimes we need that interaction beyond the scope of our computer.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Kim, I'm wondering, as a business, how do you offset the cost of providing special benefits? Because I know that's other things that we've done, and maybe you can share about some of the, special benefits that you've started to address mental health concerns, with, the market demand to increase salaries. Right now, it's harder to employ people. Like it's an employee market, and people can demand higher salaries. So you've got increased costs for special services, you have market demand for higher salaries, and yet you still have to remain a profitable business. How, as the CEO, are you balancing that?
Yeah, well, it's not easy.
No.
But I think, again, as an organization where people are the center point, it's about prioritization. So as with any business, you have a strategic plan. Any organization, you start with a strategic plan and you understand what your priorities are, and then you fund accordingly. So we've had to shift prioritization of our budget to be able to accommodate all that's going on, from providing different types of activities for our team members to participate in, as Destiney said, so that they feel connected to one another, having happy hours, offering lunch at the office. Because one thing that we've noticed is folks want to come in, but when they come in and it is quiet and folks are in their offices with the doors shut, having meetings on camera and not buzzing around the space in the way that they used to, that why did I just drive into work if I'm coming into an office that has a quiet environment and there's no energy there? I'm just going to stay home.
Right.
So now we've shifted to, let's find purposeful ways to bring people together. And we've asked our leaders, the heads of departments and teams, to, on a regular basis that makes sense for them so that there isn't resistance, bring people together, whether it's for a creative review and say, we're going to do this in person as opposed to on camera, come on in, or we're going to have lunch together as a team, or there's a team member that is about to have a baby, let's have the baby shower in the office, or let's go to a restaurant and meet up together. But that all takes funding too. And so finding where you can loosen up the funds to be able to support that activity is tricky. In the early days of the pandemic, we found that there was a lot of cost savings with working from home, and our travel and entertainment budget was not being spent because nobody was traveling and nobody was entertaining. So we were able to take those funds and try to find unique ways to support our team. For the holiday time frame, we did hand deliveries of gift boxes that we created for every single employee, and our leadership team each took a group of employees' names and we drove to their homes, and in a socially distant, safe manner, we delivered them a holiday gift. So you have to get really creative, but the tricky part that you mentioned is this wide open job market. We are seeing folks get job offers from anywhere in the world for 30 to 40% more than we are able to pay them. And that is by the dozens, not by the individual or by a handful. And so when you think about a P&L for an organization that has to accommodate an increase of 30 to 40% in salaries for dozens of people, it's not tenable.
No.
And so there's this revolving door of staff, which creates more downstream pressure on your team, and the burnout becomes even greater. So it's very careful care of your people, and staying in very close contact and communication is key. We're not perfect at it. We're trying really, really hard to do the best that we can and to keep the heart of what our organization is and stands for, and to have that guiding principle of people and caring for people. And I think as long as we do that, we'll succeed in the end, but it hasn't been easy.
Well, I am impressed at the creative ideas that you all have come up with, and the way you just continue to, again, that evolution, right? And trying different things and really trying to keep that sense of culture. I really appreciate the efforts you're taking to care for your people. I think there's some really great practical ideas there for us. Superintendent Myers-Small, what advice would you have for others who are leading sectors traumatized by the pandemic, like education and healthcare? I mean, we just heard the pressures in the business world from Kim, trying to balance these things. And then a little bit from Destiny with being in the healthcare field. Healthcare and education have just been impacted like no one else, I feel like. Do you have any advice for people who are leading in areas like yours?
Sure. I think, again, I always like to set context. I think it's important to share that I'm not the CEO of widgets, right? I'm not the CEO of cars or Legos. I'm the CEO of people, of children, of scholars. And so that really makes a significant difference when you're managing individuals, human beings. And so as you think about how the pandemic has so adversely impacted education, everything from, again, the social emotional aspects. We also talk about unfinished learning. So some of the gaps with trying to learn online or, not participating in remote learning and trying to get that excitement and that connection back. I've come from the framework of trauma-informed leadership, and I actually did a webinar on this about a year ago. And when you think about trauma-informed leadership, it's really a way of understanding or appreciating that there's an emotional world of experiences that people are bringing to work every single day. Some people have experienced loss specific to the pandemic or just loss in general. The isolation can trigger, past experiences from childhood or just from before. And so we know that those emotional triggers aren't necessarily contained, and we can see them unfold and happen at work, depending on the amount of stress that's happening there. So when we think about trauma-informed leadership, particularly in education and healthcare, there are really kind of 6 big buckets that I ask people to think about. One, ensuring that safety is intact, and you've heard that echoed a little bit. Not only physical safety, but psychological safety, emotional and social safety.
Yeah.
The other component is trustworthiness and transparency amongst your staff, amongst family members and partners, and making sure that you can bring information that is as clear and cogent as possible. I think that what's also important, because I saw something in the chat about a resistant colleague, peer support and peer support and mutual self-help, right? Of making sure that we help to understand that we normalize that it's okay to ask for help, and that we build that type of culture so that it's not necessarily just a supervisor saying, I have concerns, but that colleagues can talk to one another, or I don't like to say subordinate, but a subordinate can talk to a supervisor. I think it's also, and that connects to empowerment, voice, and choice, right? To ensure that people know that they can talk to someone other than a supervisor-supervisee relationship and just say, listen, I'm noticing, you're just not yourself. Tell me
Right.
what, how can I help? Or
Yeah.
what resources can I try and put in your hand? And then also confronting cultural, historical, and gender issues to ensure that we promote meaningful inclusion. We know that the pandemic highlighted many, many things, but certainly the disparities between those who have and who don't have, it became very apparent, everything from technology to access to food, healthcare, and other resources. So confronting some of those barriers from a cultural or a historical perspective, I think is also important, but just really taking and making the time. And I think the word of the day here is building those relationships, building relationships and making those connections. And that's something that was much more difficult, certainly trying to do that through a screen on Zoom or on Teams or Google, but really making sure that you take and make that time, but you do it from a trauma-informed relationship, just to summarize, to recognize that people are hurting, that people are struggling, and that we have to really meet people where they are, but we can't be afraid to address it and do it in a way that is meaningful and supportive and non-threatening.
Oh, that's so helpful. That's great. I love that framework, that trauma informed leadership is wonderful. I appreciate that. In just a moment, we're going to move to some of our questions that have been submitted from the audience, and I appreciate our panelists. Some of you have been answering those, typing answer to those as we go, so thank you for your mindful interaction with our guests. But before we go to those in our discussion, Jean, I'm wondering how does a chaplain from your team care for people who consider themselves non-religious, or maybe, you know, they're from a different faith background? We're talking about being in the marketplace. So how is that managed? How is that handled?
Sure. It's a wonderful opportunity, first off, to get to speak to people of different backgrounds. And as we've heard from Lesli and Destiney, people have historical backgrounds, they have different cultural backgrounds, they have different life experiences that they bring to the table. And everybody's just so different. And when you craft relationships with people, that means you're going to learn about them. You're going to try to understand them and make yourself available to them. And the way we do that is by constantly representing ourselves as someone who is not specific. For example, in our spiritual and faith background, we're non-denominational. So first off, because sometimes people who are faith-based, right, or faith-driven, may feel that, well, what is your denomination, so that I'm not going to pick up bad information from you, and so that gets clarified pretty quickly. And so because we come across in that manner, we find that people of other faith find it to be very comfortable, because even those who are non-religious many times are interested in having a conversation, just like Destiney was talking about a little earlier, to have these discussions about race, about social issues that are coming to the light, over the last couple of years. And I know even for myself, coming from I'm Hispanic, my family came from other countries, and the idea to have people who are interested in having a conversation with you about it, and to be able to do that in a non-judgmental way, not pushing things on me like their religion. But what we find is very attractive is when we give people an invitation. So when they're talking about maybe a life situation, we invite them to have a spiritual conversation. If they're not interested in that, we still love them, support them, care for them, shoulder their burdens. But if they want to have a spiritual conversation, we would love to do that. Now, many people come from a different faith background, from maybe that particular chaplain. And so sometimes people come to us and say, hey, I've lost touch with my faith. I'm a Muslim, and I've lost touch with my faith, and I'd love to connect with a mosque or an imam, and we're happy to do that. We're happy to connect them. Or they came from a Jewish faith and they lost touch with the synagogue that they grew up in, and so we're happy to connect them in those areas. But quite frankly, and what happens really very, very often, to us it's a pleasing thing, people tell us, no one's really had a spiritual conversation with me, or a faith conversation with me. I'd love to hear some more about what does that look like? What is faith? What is living in the world today with a faith? What does that look like? And I think the way we address it, and some other chaplain ministries do, I think, a good job of, is we try to have very diverse team members. So, for example, there was an organization in Massachusetts and said, we love this idea, but we don't understand how would we be able to fulfill it. Our employees have 5 different languages other than English as their primary language. How would we do this? And we were able to do that. We have chaplains who speak a lot of different languages. And this so happened in that particular part of the world, we had people who spoke that particular set of languages. And I think another way we do that is by having, within this diverse team member status, is we have female chaplains, because there are a lot of organizations, and the significant portion of our chaplains are female.
Awesome.
And I know we have a lot of issues that are coming up that we didn't see a few years ago. So we still have all the common ones, like the relationships, the family issues, the grief, the concerns over illness, family illness, all those are the top ones. But nowadays we also get questions about people concerned over their, sexuality interests, how they fit into the community, how they fit into a faith community, or just the community in general, where they're caring for aging parents. And I know we have a lot of men who are concerned with their issues with pornography. That's a tough one to talk to a female chaplain about. So they generally would talk to some issues like that about with a male chaplain, and female employees have issues that they're often times interested in speaking with a female chaplain. So we really try to get these diverse team members together to satisfy the needs of those employees. And so I think that's a big reason why it's been very successful with the non-religious and people of other faith. But I think one additional point is, because for us anyway, in our background, we were founded by a retired Army chaplain. And the idea was, wow, I could do the same thing at companies that I was doing in the Army, which was loving people no matter who they were, what their problems were, what their issues were, and just let them know that we were interested in them and we wanted to love them and care for them. And frankly, a big part of what we're talking about too when we speak with people today is also helping them, pointing them to resources and guiding them and standing alongside of them while they're utilizing these resources as well. So
Yes, yes. Well, and when you talk about the different kind of issues that a chaplain can engage with an employee, those are not typical conversations we think about having at work. And so having someone from outside come in, you can see the real value with that.
Right.
Yeah, that's really illustrates that well. Thank you, Jean. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we've got a number of questions coming in from our audience. The first one I see here that we may not have addressed yet is actually from my husband, Dr. Irvstar. That's kind of fun. Hey there, honey. Nice to have you on with us today. Can our community interactions supplement office face-to-face, given the amount of time allocated to our work week? So how do we get all the work done? But then also, you know, like I think of, you know, the lunches and the happy hours, Kim, right? How do you fit it all in?
Are you directing that at me?
Sure, why not? Let's like this. You know, you mentioned these wonderful, you know, intentional community interactions that people didn't want to come in just to work because it's quiet. But you know, so you're planning more events. How, like, do they get credit for work hours for that, or you know, how does it all fit?
Yep. So most of the time when we're bringing people together, we'll get them into the office for work, for some sort of work purpose. Like I said, maybe a creative review, but we'll tell them that we'll have lunch together while they're there. So the lunch hour is spent together in the lobby with you know, I think we ordered Moe's the last time. And then the happy hours are post-work hours, or maybe the last hour of the day, so 4 p.m. So yes, do we lose productivity with those activities? There's no question. But what we're gaining on the other end of it, in terms of that employee connection and hopefully some mental health improvement, just because they are connecting with one another and laughing, and you hear them say, gosh, that felt so good. I hear that all the time. It felt so good to be together. That's a mental health statement. I'm not a mental health professional, but I know that that's a mental health statement, that somebody is saying, it didn't feel good before, and now that I'm together with you, it feels good. So that's worth its weight in gold in losing a couple of hours of productivity to be able to do that. But we can't do it all the time. So again, it's that careful balance.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. There was mention of removing the stigma of asking for help. As leaders, we often feel we need to appear strong and have the answers. How do we help leaders lead the way with being willing to show their vulnerability, their need to ask for help? And this guest says, I believe that if our employees see their leaders demonstrating this as a normal part of the culture, they may be more open to asking for help themselves. Anyone want to comment on that? Superintendent Lesli, I see you're typing an answer there. Would you like to share with the group?
Sure, I'll answer and then I'll finish typing. So, you know, this one, it just really hits close to home for me. And it's so, one of the three hardest words to say are, I need help, right? Anyone, but particularly if you are a leader. And I recently had an experience that had been going on for a while where I really operated from a place of extreme fear. And I needed help, but I wasn't articulating that. And I finally had to have a conversation with my entire team. And I just had to say, listen, we've got to move forward. There are some things that we need to do, but I have really been doing this in a siloed approach. and I'm going to need some help and support moving forward. And you could literally see like the room of my leaders who report to me, just it was like this sigh
Mm.
of kind of relief and moving forward. And so first and foremost, whatever leadership role that you're in, and I firmly believe that everyone's a leader and it's not relegated to title. So let me start by saying that.
Mhm.
But we have to normalize asking for help in our
Yes.
organizations. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of you don't know what you're doing or that you're inept. Now, if you're saying that all the time, that's a different issue, right? But we have to normalize asking for help is okay, and it's one of the strongest and most courageous things that you can do. And so we try to work on some workplace covenants where that's established, and that it's not just a supervisor that says that to a direct report, that anyone can pull someone to the side and do it in a respectful, certainly way, but say, listen, I'm concerned, you just haven't been yourself, or you look down, or you've been a little bit sharp, right? You're giving off kind of one word responses, your emails are curt. And so we have to learn to normalize that in an organization. And going to what Dr. Destiney said, we also have to look at the cultural aspects, because in Black and Brown communities, asking for help is just for many of us, it's a no-no. That's how I was raised. You don't share family business. You don't talk about that with the school or with strangers. And so we have to learn to also break through that, but also know that some people it's really hard. So how do we do that in a way that doesn't embarrass, polarize, isolate someone? So, you don't want to put, I'm going to use some of my students' terminology. You don't want to put somebody on blast, right? You want to do it in a way that is respectful and you get that person to the side. But it's about normalizing that experience so anyone in the organization feels comfortable saying and doing that. That's really, really important. But as a leader in title, I have to model that with regularity.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that example. And I can just imagine that collective sigh of relief when that top leader says, I need help. I think of the same thing. I remember we had a town hall, and when President Porterfield said, I am struggling through this, you could feel that same collective sigh in the room. Like, oh, okay, I can be normal too. I can share. It's okay that with what I'm feeling. Thank you so much. We have another question. Any input on how to manage privacy issues that stem from discussing mental health issues in the workplace? And there's a follow-up question. Also, as an essential employer and a manufacturer, the majority of our employees had to remain at the workplace. This brought some team member resentment since they weren't allowed to work remotely. So any insight on that? So privacy issues, as well as what if you had people who had to be in person? Anyone want to tackle either part of that?
I can tackle the beginning, if
Please,
that's okay.
please.
I think that's one of the number one issues when it comes to sharing. And like Dr. Myers said, it's important to model privacy. It's important as a leader to create that relationship, because it is a relationship. It's an employer-employee relationship. But understanding that what they're sharing is confidential, it's kept within whatever four walls they're sitting in, that it's not going to be shared with HR unless the employee feels that they need to, or is cause of harm or alarm. But understanding that, when you do come to your employer and have those conversations, that again, it's not going to be used as a weapon. I think historically, a lot of employers over time or employees have felt that if they overshare, it's going to be weaponized, and they're not going to be able to share the burden. So instead, what employees end up doing is leaving, right? Instead of having uncomfortable conversations or sharing their mental health or sharing what they're going through or even sharing their addiction, because that's rampant right now in our current environment after COVID as well. And asking for help, as most of our panelists have said. So definitely creating a relationship of, you know, confidentiality and having that as first thing first thing that we say in a conversation. Someone comes to me and understand that this is going to be kept confidential, and if you don't want me to keep it confidential, what would you like me to do with this information? And allow it to be the employee's responsibility to tell the employer what they would like to do with that information. um, and I know sometimes we fall into the grounds of, well, what do we do as far as our ethics? Like if this person is, doing something that's going to harm them or harm their children or things like that. That's when you give them their resources and you express to them, I feel that at this time, this may be something that you may want to seek help with so and so. Are you okay with me providing your name to EAP or HR to follow up with you? Because some things we just can't turn a blind eye to, right? Too many times have we heard, both in our personal realm and also in our employer realm, that person was such a good person, I never saw it coming.
So good.
Um, so it's very important just to, make sure that you keep those lines of communication and your intentions clear.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this time has flown by so quickly. Wow, we are about out of time for the panelist discussion part. Do any of our panelists have just one last comment before we wrap up, whoever jumps in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak just really briefly to that point of confidentiality. It is the foundation of the chaplain ministries that people feel comfortable from that aspect. And they test us at the beginning, there's no doubt, a lot of times. And I would just say that if you are running an organization, no matter what you implement, deploy, provide, that you have given serious consideration to the confidentiality aspect if you want your employees to actually utilize it.
And can anyone real quickly speak to, any resentment from colleagues who don't have the option to work remote?
Resentments to colleagues, that happens. I mean, it happens quite frequently. How could someone works remotely and I can't? And what I like to explain is their importance of their work that they're doing on site is not one that can be placed remote. And if it was, then it would not allow that level of oversight that is required by that one specific person that's doing the job. So I like to highlight how important it is for them to be present and to perform the job versus being remote and not being able to perform the job. Not saying that the remote person's job is not less than, but no matter what you do and no matter what advantages or disadvantages, there's always going to be some type of silent resentment. But it's just understanding and explaining the why behind it.
That's good. One last thing I'll add. Many, many years ago, my pastor did a sermon entitled Leading While Bleeding. And it was so powerful. And, as leaders, we have to just be cognizant of the fact that our presence impacts and infiltrates the whole atmosphere, right? And so we just have to be modeling. We have to be mindful of what we're modeling, what we're putting out in the atmosphere. And that we also have to know that even though we think we're so strong and we can do this and we've got this, that there are times when other people have to come in and help because what we're doing is not continuing to be helpful and it's shifting towards being hurtful. So just being mindful of leading while you're bleeding.
Wow, that's a great word to end on. Thank you. Thank you so much. All four of you. This has been an incredibly rich discussion, and I'm so appreciative